Hey, welcome to my Warframes Where They Are Now series, a little series I've had brewing in the back of my mind since the early days of Warframe, quote unquote. I'm going to put this little intro at the beginning of every video in this series. If you've heard this once or more, feel free to skip it. This is just my opinion and is not guaranteed to be fact. Remember, with Warframe, everyone plays at least a little different from each other. That's why there's 52 frames as of making this intro. Of course. That being said, I do plan on being as objective as I can with this series. But bias will always be a potential problem, and will definitely shine through in certain episodes, if not all. Now, that being said, I hope you enjoy the series. June 3rd, 2023. This week we're going to talk about Saryn, the walking virus. I don't really have a clever opening for this one, I'm not going to lie. Base stats on a level 30 Saryn Prime are 300 armor, 300 energy, 375 health, 300 shields, and regular sprint speed. Her passive is status effects applied upon enemies, last for 25% longer. May sound a bit dumb at first, but it's actually very useful in the case of her kit. And comes in handy if you run Condition Overload, which realistically speaking you probably should if you're running Saryn. You don't necessarily have to, but it's a good idea. Saryn's first ability, Spores, is when she decides to fling the gunk off of her hands at an enemy and afflict them with an unknown virus that does unspeakable things to them. It also spreads on death, allowing more people to experience the wonderful thing that is that horrible virus. Saryn's second ability, Molt. She sheds her skin and runs away. It increases her speed and does a decent amount of toxin damage. But yeah, that's the ability, I guess. I ended up helmeting it off, and honestly I'm going to explain what's going on with my build, because I have a bit of a weird build with mine. But even before I made my weird-ass builds, I never really used Molt all that much, although I have heard of people using it in some really peculiar ways, so if you're interested, definitely look up one of those guides. I don't know the ability well enough to really do that. Saryn's third ability, Toxic Lash, adds toxin damage to her weapons, and doubly so for her melee weapons. It has a ridiculously long duration on it, as well, which is kind of the best part of it. You just kind of set and forget it. Saryn's fourth ability, Miasma, releases a poison mist that does a shitload of viral damage to enemies within range, and even more so to enemies that are afflicted with spores, which is actually very, very nice. Basically turns her into a nuke frame if you decide to go for that approach. And frankly, why wouldn't you? Unless you're doing some weird shenanigans like I am. As for my build, I run Duration and Strength, because I don't really need a whole lot more range than she has normally for what I use her for. I also run her first ability Augment, and I've helmeted Eclipse onto her, which, if you can't tell where this is going, gives her 3 weapon damage buffs. Because Venom Dose makes her first ability apply corrosive damage to your weapons, and then of course Eclipse. I'm sure most of you know what that does, and as we talked about with Toxic Lash, that's another damage buff. So it gets pretty damn strong pretty quick. So how is the walking virus for Deviri? Well, I'd argue that she's actually one of the best frames for Deviri, period point blank. She's one of the frames that I always get excited to see whenever I'm in Steel Path Circuit, because I know that it's actually going to be fairly reasonable for me to get through no matter what weapons I get with my build, but if I get some good weapons, oh man, I'm going to be there for a while. Matter of fact, my longest runs are usually because I got Saryn and, I don't know, whatever strong weapon I end up with, because, I mean, for fuck's sake, most of us have a bunch of them by now. But she is an absolute blast for Deviri. No matter which form of Deviri you get, because on the regular Deviri missions, when you end up in the Undercroft, it's kind of broken when you just deploy spores and then shoot one enemy and watch it, the rest of them just end up dead in a cascade of poison. Or I guess technically corrosive damage, but you get the point. So, yeah, no, she's pretty damn good for that. So about that weirdness I mentioned before. As you may have seen during the talking about my build segment, I have an Eidolon's tab. That is because Saryn's actually my Eidolon frame. With the 3 damage buffs, I find it does plenty of damage against the Eidolons. I don't really need to go much higher than that. I used to use Chroma. At one point I used Protea, because Protea was my most survivable frame, and I wasn't good at Eidolons. I'm sure we all had that frame. I also used to run Rhino for the same reason. But anyways, with the 3 damage buffs and the Fenmore, I tend to rinse through the Eidolons with no issues, so that's what I use. I know it's a bit unconventional. I'm sure many of you are probably scratching your heads like, how the fuck did I come up with that? Because, to be completely honest, I'm not even sure. I just kind of noticed that her second ability could be replaced with Eclipse, because I was kind of going through a phase of putting Eclipse on every frame that I could, because yay, damage buff, but I found out that I could put it on Saryn without removing Toxic Lash, and I was like, wait a minute, I know what her first ability augment is. And so, it just sort of happened. But I digress. Saryn is pretty good all around, including some random niche stuff like Eidolons. It's a bit funny to think about. But, surprisingly, she's aging beautifully. It seems that as they add more content, she's somehow finding even more uses. She's the Swiss Army knife of frames, if you will. But anyway, that's it. Thank you all for watching, and remember, wash your hands after using Saryn. You have no idea where she's been.